March is Myeloma Action Month, and there is a lot of discussion about being a myeloma warrior. And a myeloma warrior is not necessarily somebody who says, I'm going to have unfounded hope. It's not necessarily about winning or bringing your A game or fighting. It really is about being able to have the information you need to make an informed decision so you can live as long as possible with myeloma. It is about saying, if I see other people that are surviving, living with, and integrating myeloma into their lives, I can do it as well. And actually saying, why not me? You recently heard he had cancer, pancreatic cancer. A couple of years ago, John McCain was diagnosed with cancer. A year almost after that, he chose to stop treatment, and a few days after he's stopping treatment, he actually passed away from cancer. But when you actually think about other people, it is other people's cancer. It's not yours. You don't internalize it. But when you start thinking, it is you, it is your loved one, it's your mom, dad, child, uncle, aunt who has cancer, you actually start having fear. You are doubtful. You are uncertain. You question your religion, faith, or whatever it is that you believe in or don't believe in. You question the physical and the psychological aspect of nature. But what if you have cancer, but you don't live with this continuous fear of dying from cancer, or you actually put aside your fear and actually choose to live? Would you still be working, or would you be retiring? Would you work the same place that you are working? Would you make other life decisions? Would you move? Would you move towards your grandchildren or away from your children? Would you build different relationships? And would you have different relationships with your faith, with your God, or whoever else that you need to have? So today and tomorrow, I will be the only person who doesn't have a PhD behind his name that will be speaking up here. But I kind of consider myself an expert in this topic because I've been living with myeloma for 161 dog years. When I was diagnosed with myeloma in 1995, 6 months after that, and having gone through various chemotherapies at that time, there was none of these novel therapies that are available today, my wife and I decided to go get Snoopy. Snoopy became my cancer support dog, and the idea is, if I have a Snoopy, I cannot die, right? I have to take care of that dog. Snoopy lived for 14 years and passed away in October of 2010. But about 8 years after we got Snoopy, we decided, well, I'm here, Snoopy is here, everybody is here. So maybe we should get Snoopy a friend. And we got Happy. Happy lived 14 and a half years. And she passed away last August. And after Snoopy passed and Happy was by herself, we decided to get Missy. I tell you this story to tell you that at some point, we have to stop living to die. And we have to start living so we can live. We have to start making plans in spite of our cancers. Because our cancer is going to be there. It's not going to go away. So we might as well live with it and decide to make the best out of it. While you think the dogs are ruling the house, it's actually the cat, Cece, on the bottom left that really rules the house. Cece was found put in a trash bag and in a trash with 3 of her litter mates. The other 3 passed away, but we were able to save her, and now she's living what I consider a wonderful life. So the idea here is that I'm telling you this through the dogs and the cats and my own life. What if we live? we need to make plans for being able to live. I have been fortunate, because of my myeloma, to be able to visit various parts of the world because of my cancer, actually. The bottom left-hand corner is a place in Ethiopia where my wife and I visited. It is a church that was built in the 12th century. And on the bottom right-hand corner is my parents celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary. Phase is not necessarily an integral part of my cancer, but it is for my family. Not necessarily for me, but for my family. The first time and the only time I saw my dad cry was when they told him that I had cancer and I had only 2 to 3 years to live. And he said, this is not the natural progression of life, and I need to die before you. And he actually passed away from colon cancer a couple of years ago at age 83. But I think one of the reasons I consider myself to have been here is because of the prayers and the good vibes that my family is able to put around me. But I'm not the only one who's living with cancer and has been integrating cancer into my life for a long period of time. Jim, 19 years ago, when he was told that he had cancer, he actually went ahead and got his tombstone made. 19 years later, every year he goes out and he cleans it up. Peter is the founder of our support group. Within the first year after he was diagnosed, he gave away a lot of his belongings. He said a year later, he went around collecting it back. And he was able to live with myeloma for 14 plus years. Jack is a person who has gone through multiple transplants, including a transplant from his sister, and has been complete remission for 17 plus years and is living with myeloma. Mike passed away after living with myeloma for 25 years and really helping elevate the science and art of being able to be a caregiver, a care partner, and also a myeloma advocate and a cancer research advocate. I would rather live without cancer, but cancer really has enabled me to be able to create the leadership philosophies I have in life. And for a long period of time, I separated my cancer life, my work life, and my home life. But several years ago, I decided they cannot live separately. I can't work and not feel free to bring my whole self to work. So my work, cancer, home, they're all now integrated, and they kind of define who I am and the philosophies I have. Cancer has also allowed me to build relationships I wish I didn't have, but I'm glad I have. And cancer, and in order for us to live with cancer, we really need to be respectful of the past, understand the present, and really be energized by the future, because there are several things in the pipeline to help us move forward with cancer. And so my living with cancer action plan, the first one we talked about is hope. The second one is actually having actions. Being able to have relationships, being able to build your knowledge, and actually having that mindset, even if I go down or cancer puts me down, I'm going to decide to get up and live with cancer. The relationship portion is really important because you really need to have relationships with you and with people around you, but it really is important being able to build the right relationship with your care providers, your doctors, your nurses, your supporting system. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But building the team by itself is really not enough. You have to decide to educate yourself and decide to be the leader of that team, because after all, you are the one who has cancer and your family is the one who has cancer. When someone asks me, what is one thing that I should do in order to live as long as possible with cancer, is you need to consult a myeloma specialist if you have access. Because studies show that those that have been treated by myeloma specialists live longer than those that don't. They talked about the know your myeloma defining events, the CRAB criteria, the calcium, renal failure, anemia, and bone pain. But what does it mean? For me, it may be that if my M spike goes above 0.2, I may have a bone incident. But for other people, they may be fine even if their myeloma M spike goes beyond 1. So being able to know what not only the studies show, but actually internalizing that for yourself is really important. Track your history, because your doctors make decisions based on what happened to you in the past and what has been happening to you in the recent past. And when I say history, it really is not just your M spike or blood work. It really is, when is the last time you had a colonoscopy, or when is the last time you had a PET, PSA scan, or a breast exam, or a cholesterol test. So it really is your whole self, not just your myeloma, because you are not your myeloma. Myeloma is one of the things you have, and as you start living with myeloma, you are going to have other things that come into your life as well. Know your options. In today's age, living in the US, you have options in most cases. And so being able to ask your doctor what's next is really one of the most important questions that you can ask your doctor. The quality of life needs are very different for everybody. For me, I want to really protect my time. How much time I spend in the doctor's office, I want to minimize that as much as possible. If possible, I want to get on an oral medication. If possible, I don't want to wait for my doctor for 2 hours for him to finish a consult with somebody else, because I'm actually taking off from work in order to come visit the doctor. So for me, quality of life is defined by how much time control I have while I'm living with my cancer. And if you don't seek clinical trials, when you're consulting with your doctor, you should. Because clinical trials, despite the miss, is not when you run out of options. You should be asking for clinical trials. Do I qualify? What type of clinical trials do I qualify for? And what type of clinical trials should I consider? But I think the most important one is being able to build a relationship with your doctor, with your caregiver, with your family, both internal and external, in order to live as long as possible with myeloma. This is something that gets missed oftentimes, which is know you are one of a kind. How I get treated doesn't mean you should be treated the same way. Or if you find a doctor that tells you, in our center, this is how we do it, and so you will do that same thing for you, try to find another doctor if you have an option, or go to another center if you have an option. Because I don't want to be treated like everybody else, no disrespect, but I consider myself unique. I consider my myeloma unique. I consider my life, things that surround me, very, very, very unique. Doctor is also important because I believe your survival depends on the type of doctor you have. When I was diagnosed, I was 25. I didn't have any symptoms, except that I was coughing for a long time, and my wife said, if you don't go get checked, don't come home one day. I said, okay, probably I should go get checked because I want to go home. And the doctor, I went to an emergency clinic, they did blood test, and they found out I was very anemic. And they said, you need to figure out why you are anemic. You don't have any upper respiratory infection. The following day, I made an appointment with an internist, and the internist looked at the numbers, and he said, I suspect 3 things. Give me more blood, and I will call you in a couple of days. In a couple of days, he called me at a place where I was doing internship, and he said, Yelak, you have this thing called multiple myeloma. It is not curable, but it is highly treatable. So come to my office tomorrow and we'll discuss. 2 things happened there, right? One is he was looking for multiple myeloma, a disease of quote unquote the elderly, in a young person at age 25. It took him 2 days to figure out I had multiple myeloma. And despite all his training that taught him that he shouldn't be looking for multiple myeloma, he did. So my survival started when he went to medical school. So choosing the right doctor is really important in your myeloma journey. And so if we agree that we need to have the right myeloma specialist as part of your treatment team, how do you go about finding one? For me, this is a formula I use, really. Is he or she a member of the International Myeloma Working Group? The International Myeloma Working Group, where a lot of the leading myeloma specialists belong, is a key trendsetter in how people with multiple myeloma get treated. So I want to find somebody who practices in there. If you live in the US, there is one around you. So find one if you have an option. The other one is, as I said earlier, I don't want somebody who treats me in our hospital. This is how we treat myeloma patients, and be able to give me just the standard of care for that hospital. I want somebody who has the ability, the willingness, and even the clout to be able to individualize treatment for me. But I also want that person to have a heart of a teacher, because the more he teaches me, the more I can teach others. The more he teaches my local myeloma person, the more my local myeloma person can teach other myeloma patients as well. If you go to a local myeloma doctor or hematologist, and if you have some things you don't like about that doctor, feel free. I give you permission to change a doctor if you have an option, unless you live in an area where he is the only hematologist, and in order to change doctor, you have to travel 200 miles. But don't change doctor because you are early in your treatment and you are finding about myeloma and you are just miserable, right? Change doctors for a cause, and I give you permission to do that. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to go with somebody from here in the audience to visit Dubai. And we were able to go into the desert safari. And it really is beautiful. But if you get lost there, even for an hour or so, you are dead. You will not come out. So what happens when people go into that safari? There are about 20, 25 SUVs that go in there. Before they actually get into the desert, they stop and they deflate their tires so they can increase the surface area between the car and the sand so that they don't sink in the sand. And the other thing they do is actually they decide who they will be looking after and who will be looking after them, because they understand if they go in there as a team, they will come out as a team. And so I contend to you then, in myeloma, you also need a team. And you need to be able to decide who is going to be part of your team and what types of specialists are going to constitute that team. That your team really should also include your caregiver, your local hematologist, your myeloma specialist, nurses, cardiologists, internal medicine, and any other type of specialists that you may need. Obviously, you need a relationship with industry and pharmaceutical, not only companies, but also pharmacy companies as well. But as you build this team, it really is important to be conscious about who is going to coordinate care. Is it you? Is it your caregiver? Is it your primary specialist? Is it your myeloma specialist that is going to coordinate care? Because you can easily get lost in the system, and you don't want that to happen. You want to consciously decide who's going to coordinate care. Your caregiver really is an important part of your myeloma family, if you would. A few weeks ago, my wife, Lowell, I came home. She was already home. She made dinner. She sat down by the table, and I was making coffee, and I look at her like from the side as she was sitting on the table. She said, "Hey, Yelak, I went to the doctor today." I said, "I didn't know she was going to the doctor." And I said, I didn't reply. "So you're not going to ask me what kind of doctor I went to?" I said, "Okay, what kind of doctor did you go to?" She said, "I went to the boob doctor." I said, "Okay, then she must have found something on her breast during self-examination." And so my mind is going that way. I said, why did you go to the boob doctor? Well, I want to get my breasts done for you, she said. I said, at this time, I said, I'm laughing internally, and I said, okay, what the heck is going on? And yeah, I want to look good for you, and I'm going to get my boobs done. But I tell you to tell you that, and you'll hear this during the caregivers breakout, sex, money, and drugs are the three top things that cause friction between myeloma patients and their caregivers, spouses, and partners, or whatever you want to call it. So you need to make an active decision and an active choice to actually have those discussions with your care partners. The other thing I think is, how do you deal having myeloma and being whatever that may be? For me, it is having myeloma and being Black. If you look in this, so Dr. Dury told us earlier that Blacks are two times more likely to be diagnosed with myeloma than their Caucasians. But if you look here, there are Blacks to be counted by hand. We as a community need to do a better job of being able to do that. It is not because there are no Blacks in the Boca Raton area. It really is because our reach into the Black community is not as high, and we need to do a better job of that. And you'll hear more about this initiative from the International Myeloma Foundation that is being started and will accelerate soon in that area. But there is also several other questions that you have to ask when living with myeloma. Who do you tell and when do you tell them that you have myeloma? When do you tell friends? How young is too young to tell a child that you have myeloma and it's terminal and you may die of myeloma? Is having a family an option? When I was diagnosed at 25, there was nobody else around me that lived long enough. So we decided not to have children. But now we go out and tell people that if they choose to, they may have children because he or she may end up living 20, 25 years post-diagnosis. And how about working and having myeloma? That is really, how do you disassociate the stigma associated with being quote unquote terminally ill, or you have cancer, you go to the doctor once a month, which means you are less productive than somebody else who doesn't have cancer but is just browsing the internet every day, right? So that are the conscious discussions and decisions that we have to make. These are some of the most frequented questions that I hear on social media and when I talk to other doctors, other patients. Did you have a stem cell transplant, or when do you have a stem cell transplant? Should I have maintenance therapy? Are alternative therapies something that I should consider? Bisphosphonate and clinical trials. So when I was diagnosed, I was offered stem cell transplant, but I decided not to do a stem cell transplant. And 23 years later, I have not yet done a stem cell transplant. I have been on many other treatments, maintenance or induction, but I have not had a stem cell transplant. These are the three questions I asked. Will I live longer? Would I have a better quality of life after my transplant? Is it worth putting my life priorities on hold while I go through that stem cell transplant? For me, at 25, going through graduate school, all the answers for this were negative, so I decided not to do a stem cell transplant, collect my stem cells, but not do a stem cell transplant. I get asked about alternative therapies for myeloma. If you want to die, do alternative therapies. If you want to live, do complementary therapies, right? So you cannot not have quote-unquote myeloma treatment and replace that by an herb or some other alternative treatment. You really need complementary treatment when you live with DEX or when you're going through various other treatment and treatment side effects. I think what we really need to consider as patients, caregivers, is really not about the alternative, but how do we balance the patient's life, both physical, psychological, emotional. We talked about considering clinical trials, and we all think about clinical trials as being those where we get randomized to be on one drug versus another drug. But there are also things called observational clinical trials, which we can consider. We don't have to be treated by them or by these clinical trials, but we register into them, and the industry, the clinical investigators actually get some information about how a drug is working, what the quality of life challenges patients have. So you should, in my opinion, consider at minimum what is called the observational clinical trials that various industry members provide. So clinical trials also now are almost being required to have this quality of life or patient-reported outcome angle. And these use what is called validated instruments to measure your quality of life. A couple of them are shown there, the PROMISE and the FACT-MM study, but they focus around anxiety, fatigue, pain, the feeling of empowerment, both your physical and your functional well-being. But they do not really measure the time commitment that I talked to you about earlier. So you really need to have a way of discussing what is your quality of life need and being able to actually articulate your quality of life need to your doctor. Because the more you have that conversation with your doctor, you can actually tailor treatment to what your quality of life needs are. There are multiple treatment options available that could potentially meet your quality of life requirements. So don't take whatever the doctor tells you. Help articulate your quality of life needs as well, whether it is your family situation, your social status, your ability to pay. That's something we need to continue to ask about that. If you, for example, have out-of-pocket restrictions. One of the most important questions, as I mentioned earlier to you, is what is next? You will relapse. In most cases, maybe it may be 10 years down the line, it may be 15 years down the line. I know I have a friend who had a stem cell transplant, was not on any drug for 15 years and relapsed and did another stem cell transplant. So for him, he had to always ask during his doctor's visit, what's next for me if this doesn't work or if it works? As we start to conclude, I want to talk a little bit about, we talked about tracking your numbers, right? So it really should be very easy in these days to be able to track your numbers, to track your medical history, because almost all of the major cancer centers have this thing called MyChart, Epic, or some form of being able to show you your electronic health record. And you should be able to get a hold of it, either within that environment or be able to download portions of this data on your computer so you can take it to somebody else. The challenge with electronic health records is that they don't talk with each other. For example, if I went to UT Southwestern and they have the same system, but they have their own version of that system. And if I needed to go to Mayo for a consult, I really need to be able to download all that information and somehow upload it or communicate that information to my doctor at the Mayo Clinic, or somehow be able to give him access to that. Currently, the systems, even though they may be built on a similar back end, the front ends don't yet talk with each other. We talked about complementary options. Exercise and sleep are two things really you should be concerned about and actually tracking. If you have a smartphone, you should really consider updating your goals of exercise and actually tracking to make sure that you hold yourself accountable. Somebody here earlier said that when they feel fatigued, they call somebody to help them go out. But you could use this digital health system in addition to a buddy system in order to force you to get up and actually exercise and do something. If you actually look at this chart here, the days that is red actually is the days of DEX for me. You can actually see there's less sleep, which means people around me feel the pressure, which means I need to be more conscious of what I say, what I do or don't do. So not only am I seeing and feeling that, I'm actually seeing and tracking that. The other one is, I think a lot of us here earlier said we are on Rev or on PALM or on Nilaro or some combination of that. When you take medicine on a regular basis or once a week like Nilaro, what happens? I kind of forget. I said, okay, I had dinner. I'm going to, right before I go to sleep, I take it. And I say, oh, my mind said, oh, you already took it. But did I? I don't know if I did. I'm sure a lot of you struggle with that as well. So there are tools you can download for free to help you, to help remind you to actually take your medication. And they're actually, they nag you. I have on an iPhone, is it, have you taken it? Have you taken it? And I either say, go away, don't remind me again, or say, yes, I have actually taken it. They're really helpful. The other one is the being able to find bargains of drugs that your insurance may not cover or your out-of-pocket copay may be high. One thing I want to remind you, if you're newly diagnosed, relapsed refractory, your myeloma journey is going to evolve through time, and your need for information is also going to evolve over time. Be comfortable with that. As much information as you seek, you're not going to have all the answers. Be comfortable with that. I'm a data scientist by profession, and I ask, okay, how do we measure that, or what are the metrics to do X or Y? I don't get the answers all the time, or the answers are, it depends. Or when I ask Dr. Dury, it's one answer. When I ask Dr. Haruso back there, he gives me the French answer. So the answers may not necessarily always satisfy you. So be comfortable with that as well. Your myeloma journey, the longer you live, is going to be very complex. So this is my journey. Pre-novel agentis, this is when I was under hardcore chemotherapies, and then post-novel agentis, when I was actually doing immunomodulatory drugs like thalidomide, Revlimid, or when I was doing the proteasome inhibitors, Velcade and Nilaro for maintenance and various other reasons. I tell you all this so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There is somebody who is going through what you are going through somewhere out there. Find them, connect with them, and be able to have the conversation with them about their journey so you can actually learn from their journey. Coming to patient and family seminars is one of them. There are 4 this year, one of them obviously here at Boca, but in New Jersey, in North Carolina, and in California. Then regional community workshops that Kelly does, I think he does one every other week type of thing. He likes to travel. So if you are here or listening, take Kelly up. And if there is no regional community workshop or patient and family seminar, there probably is a support group in your area. And if there is no support group in your area, find Robin and she will help you create one. And if all else fails, or in addition to all of that, call the info line. The info line is well connected. If they have a question that they can't answer, they have actually a pool of International Myeloma Working Group people that they can get answers from. So don't feel like because they are not quote unquote medically trained, they don't have the answer. They're well versed. One of them is actually sitting back there, and you can ask her later on if you have any questions. But, yes, but there are also various social media sites that you can go to be able to get answers to your questions or pose questions or listen to others as they go through their journey. Myeloma is a complex disease, as we said earlier, and you want to be done with treatment. You want to be at that finish line. There is no finish line for myeloma, and my wife reminded me, I sometimes forget to live. I want to remind you not to forget to live. Before I finish, do you have any questions? I can answer. I am available throughout the conference, but I'll be willing to take 1 or 2 questions.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
This is about environmental issues. Which place in the planet is the one that has less organ cancer? What kind of environment we find now is different?
That's a good question. So the question was, which place, if the environment plays a role in people having cancer, which place in the world is less toxic? So ask Dr. Dori tomorrow, but he was in Iceland a year or so ago, and he said in all these pristine areas, and he looked out and he looked a factory that was, I think it was an aluminum factory, and that was generating some toxins, and he said, there is no place in the world where it is completely, unless there are no humans, I don't think you'll find a place in the world that is not have some sort of cancer-causing elements. All right, I am available but for discussions, but I want to remind you as I close, have hope, but hope by itself is not enough. So have actions. Have actions, one may not be enough. You may need 2, you may need a backup to your backup. Stick it to the man, live with myeloma, not for myeloma. Run myeloma as a business. I have a myeloma vision to live as long as possible with the utmost quality of life possible. Come up with your version of that vision and actually live and be guided by that vision. But most importantly, make sure you pay it forward. So hope, action plans, and believe you can actually, you have the it takes to live with myeloma. Thank you.